The 11th and supposedly final Fast and Furious movie is the franchise's last chance to establish a forgotten member of the Toretto family in the live-action canon. In the inevitable family dinner sequence that'll cap off the next Fast and Furious movie, a spot at the table for Dom's forgotten cousin Tony Toretto should be held. Tony Toretto, who hails from the Fast and Furious Spy Racers animated series, could be a fun way to integrate the TV side of the universe with the established movie canon. While Tony might be an obscure cameo for most casual Fast and Furious viewers, longtime aficionados of all things Fast and Furious would surely be pleased with his inclusion. Fast and Furious 11 should include Dom Toretto's cousin Tony Toretto. The forgotten Toretto family member would be a fun addition to the saga. Even if you've been a loyal follower of Fast and Furious fare since the saga's inception in 2001, you might be wholly unaware of Tony Toretto's existence. That's because the character has never appeared in live action, only popping up as the lead in the animated Netflix series Fast and Furious Spy Racers. In the show, which lasted 6 seasons from 2019 to 2021, Tony is voiced by Teen Wolf alum Tyler Posey. Tony Toretto is the much younger cousin of Vin Diesel's Dominic Toretto, who reprises his iconic role in cartoon form in the series. Tony aspires to be like his famous cousin, from street racing and way too much involvement in significant espionage events. There's no reason why another seat at the obligatory family dinner sequence in Fast and Furious 11 couldn't feature Tony Toretto. Tyler Posey could translate his role to the big screen, although Tony is depicted as much younger in animation than Posey's current age, which could lead to a potential recast. The Fast and Furious movies are already so wild, Spy Racers can easily be canon. Adding the Spy Racers characters wouldn't jump the shark any more than the franchise already has. Fast and Furious Spy Racers is admittedly a somewhat out there program, even by the standards of live-action Fast and Furious films. Gone are the days of Too Fast, Too Furious, where street racing was the end, all-be-all climax. Everything in Spy Racers is usually a world-defining event, with gadgets as obscure as invisibility suits and laser cannons. It's more science fiction than any other genre, which might seem out of step with the current state of the franchise. With that said, the Fast and Furious saga threw logic out the window years ago. The 2021 entry into the series, F9, pictured a car going to space. Tony Toretto's Uncle Dom is basically a superhero at this point, with seemingly endless strength and stamina. The movies have already reached a point of wild ridiculousness beyond what viewers could ever imagine, and bringing in the Spy Racers might be the next logical step. Additionally, fans who've digested every bit of Fast and Furious content will be rewarded with their loyalty if this crossover happens. How Fast and Furious Spy Racers fits into the Fast and Furious timeline. Spy Racers came out after the fate of the Furious. Despite running for 6 seasons, Spy Racers never gave us a definitive timeline for the events of the show compared to the Fast and Furious movies. To be fair, the Fast and Furious timeline is already very complicated without having to consider a 6-season animated series. However, given that Vin Diesel voiced Dominic Toretto in Spy Racers, it's difficult not to think of the show as being set in the same continuity as the films. Unless Spy Racers takes place in an alternate universe, the show has to fit the Fast Saga's timeline. Spy Racers must begin after the events of the fate of the Furious, given that the show references the agency. Additionally, excluding Hobbs and Shaw, the fate of the Furious was the most recent Fast and Furious release when Spy Racers came out. However, the technology in Spy Racers seems so advanced that one would assume it takes place in the future. Still, considering that Dom looks pretty much the same in Spy Racers, the show cannot take place in the distant future. We can assume that Spy Racers takes visual and creative liberties when it comes to technology and what cars can or cannot do. Also, after the events of Hobbs and Shaw, F9 and Fast X, I don't think there is a lot in Spy Racers that feels too futuristic for the Fast and Furious franchise. From all-powerful surveillance programs to super hackers, nothing is impossible in the Fast and Furious universe. In other words, Spy Racers most likely takes place concurrently with the last few movies. Tony Toretto appearing in Fast and Furious 11 could answer an old franchise mystery. Who exactly are Tony Toretto's parents? The timeline is not the only mystery surrounding spy racers. While Tony Toretto was the main character throughout the entire series, the show never addressed who his parents were. We know that Tony is Dom's cousin, but other than that, we have no idea how he ties into the Toretto family we know. The Fast and Furious movies have referenced Jack Toretto multiple times and even showed Dom's father in flashbacks during F9. Yet no one has ever mentioned Jack having a brother or a sister. Dom and Mia Toretto's family tree has been retconned over the years, namely with the addition of Jacob in F9. Therefore, Fast and Furious 11 should have no problem establishing that Dom and Mia also had a cousin. It would be fun to have Tony in a Fast and Furious movie for a brief scene, even more so if he were played by his voice actor, Tyler Posey. Thanks for watching.